Bullies cornered the shy girl in the library. They didn't know she's a Special Forces veteran, just holding back. Olivia Winters stood barely 5'4" and weighed maybe 115 pounds at 18. She looked even younger, with her quiet demeanor and tendency to keep her hazel eyes fixed on the ground as she moved through the crowded hallways of Pinecrest High School. Her light brown hair was always pulled back in a simple ponytail, partially hiding the small scar near her right temple. Most students didn't even know her name, despite her having transferred to the school 4 months ago. What they didn't know was that Olivia had spent 3 years in an elite military program for exceptional teenagers, what they couldn't see beneath her oversized sweaters and faded jeans was a body hardened from thousands of hours of specialized combat training. What they couldn't understand was that Olivia chose silence, not from fear, but from discipline. Just get through this last semester, Olivia reminded herself. Each morning, as she walked through the metal detectors of Pinecrest High, the school sprawled across an entire block, housing over 2,300 students, most of whom traveled in tight social circles that had formed years ago. Being the new girl already made her an outsider, but being quiet and seemingly defenseless made her something worse, a potential target. The first person to really notice Olivia was unfortunately Heather Blackwood, a 5'8" senior, with perfect blonde hair cutting confidence, and a vicious streak that had terrorized classmates since freshman year. Her 2 loyal followers were Mackenzie Davis, a muscular track star with perpetually narrowed eyes, and Vicky Tran, a sharp-tongued debate champion who always had the perfect insult ready. It started small, a shoulder check in the hallway, followed by a fake apology. Watch it, new girl, a snicker. When Olivia walked past their lunch table, whispered comments about her thrift store clothes, her silence, her apparent weakness. Olivia absorbed it all without visible reaction, her face a mask of practiced neutrality that only seemed to infuriate Heather more. "What's wrong with this freak?" Heather muttered to Mackenzie after Olivia failed to respond to having her backpack accidentally knocked to the floor for the 2nd time that week. "It's like she's not even human." If only you knew, Olivia thought her former commander had taught her that emotional control was the difference between success and failure in high pressure situations. Emotional discipline is survival. Lieutenant Ramirez would say, the moment you let someone else control your reactions is the moment you've lost. So Olivia endured. She endured having her books knocked from her hands in crowded hallways. She endured finding her locker decorated with sticky notes calling her a charity case. She endured Heather's group following her between classes, whispering just loud enough for her to ha. The incidents escalated in the cafeteria. Mackenzie would bump into her, causing food to spill in gym class. Vicky would throw dodgeballs directly at her head with unnecessary force. Heather orchestrated it all with calculated malice. She doesn't even fight back. Heather complained to her boyfriend Ethan during lunch. What kind of person just takes it like that? Ethan frowned, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Maybe you should just leave her alone. Heather, she's not bothering anyone. Heather's eyes flashed with anger. That's exactly the problem. She acts like she's above it all, like our school isn't good enough for her. Someone needs to teach her where she stands in the food chain. Olivia heard this from 2 tables away, her enhanced situational awareness picking up every word. She felt her jaw tighten, then consciously relaxed it. Regulation of physiological responses, she reminded herself, primary training objective. Olivia had been part of a classified program called Project Sentinel, a joint military initiative that selected exceptional teenagers from military families and trained them in advanced combat and intelligence techniques, following her father's death in action. The program had become her life until it was suddenly shuttered last year due to ethical concerns. About training minors, the participants were quietly mainstreamed back into civilian life with sealed records and non-disclosure agreements, but control became harder. As weeks passed, the bullying moved beyond school when Heather's group started, following Olivia home, taking photos of her modest apartment complex and posting them online with mocking captions. They created fake social media profiles using Olivia's name to spread embarrassing content. They coordinated with other students to isolate her in group projects and lab assignments. The teachers seemed oblivious or unwilling to intervene. Mr. Parker would look away. When Heather made comments during history class, Coach Diaz never noticed when Mackenzie accidentally tripped Olivia during warm-ups. Even Principal Alvarez seemed to minimize the situation when Olivia finally reported. Some of the harassment sounds like typical teenage girl drama, Ms. Winters. Nothing we can really act on. Maybe try making some friends. They're all part of the same ecosystem. Olivia realized. Heather's mother is on the school board. Mackenzie's father coaches the championship track team. I'm just some transfer student. With no connections, the breaking point came on a Wednesday afternoon. In late March, Olivia had taken refuge in the library's back corner, working on her calculus homework, when she sensed, rather than heard, someone approaching her table perimeter. Awareness had been drilled into her, until it was instinct. Heather stood across from her, flanked by Mackenzie and Vicky, with two other girls. Olivia didn't recognize, hanging back, all wearing matching smirks. "Hey there," Olivia Heather said in a falsely sweet voice, still pretending you don't hear us talking to you. Olivia kept her eyes on her textbook and tried to focus on the problem she was solving, but Heather reached out and closed the book with a sharp snap. "I asked you a question, freak." Mackenzie moved around to one side of the table, while Vicky took the other, effectively surrounding Olivia. Their movement patterns triggering recognition in Olivia's trained mind. Classic flanking maneuver. Her brain supplied automatically tactical disadvantage. "In current position, I'm trying to study," Olivia said quietly, her voice. "Even excuse me." Heather's grin widened as she looked at her friends. "Oh, she can speak, ladies. The freak actually has a voice." Several students at nearby tables looked up, some quickly, looking away, others watching with nervous anticipation. "What's the matter, Winters?" Vicky chimed in. "Social anxiety. Got your tongue." Olivia assessed her situation rapidly. 3 primary aggressors, 2 supporting elements, multiple civilian observers. Restricted movement due to library furniture, minimal escape routes without escalation, tactical recommendation. Avoid confrontation, verbal de-escalation. Attempt first. "I just want to finish my homework, please," Olivia said, standing slowly, gathering her papers. Heather stepped closer, invading Olivia's personal space. "I don't think we're done talking yet, actually," she said, her voice dropping. "There's something we need to discuss." Olivia tried to step back, but found herself against the bookshelf. What happened next occurred with practiced precision. Heather nodded to Mackenzie, who moved to block the nearest exit, while Vicky reached forward and grabbed Olivia's backpack, dumping its contents across the table and floor. "Look what we found." "Ladies," Vicky announced, holding up a small, worn photograph that had fallen out. A photo of a stern-looking man in military uniform, with a much younger Olivia standing at attention beside him. "Is this your daddy?" Heather asked in a mocking baby voice. "Did he leave because he couldn't stand having such a pathetic daughter?" Something changed in Olivia's posture so subtly that none of the girls noticed it. But anyone with combat training would have recognized the shift immediately. Her weight distribution altered, her breathing pattern changed, her eyes now tracked all 5 opponents, simultaneously calculating distances and angles. "Who is this loser anyway?" Heather continued, picking up the photo, her acrylic nails digging into the worn edges of the only picture Olivia had left of her father, Colonel Michael Winters, Special Forces, decorated 3 times for valor, killed in action during a classified operation in the target's face, blurred in the official reports. "It doesn't matter," Olivia said, her voice suddenly different, clearer, more commanding. "Give me the photograph." Heather blinked, surprised by the change in tone, but quickly recovered. "Oh, it speaks and gives orders now." She laughed, tearing the edge of the photo slightly. "What are you, Going to do about it, freak? Olivia straightened, looking directly at Heather for perhaps the first time since arriving at Pinecrest High. What Heather saw in those hazel eyes made her step back, involuntarily. There was something there, something cold and calculating that hadn't been present before. Last chance, Olivia said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced the entire library. Give me the photograph and walk away. Heather recovered quickly, embarrassed by her momentary weakness. In front of her friends, or what she laughed nervously, "You'll bore us with your sad orphan story." The word orphan hung in the air for a moment, and in that fraction of a second a decision was made. Olivia's right hand moved in a blur, grabbing Heather's, wrist in a precise hold that looked almost gentle, but caused the taller girl to gasp and instantly release the photograph, which Olivia caught with her left hand before it hit the ground. What the Heather began, but found herself suddenly unable to speak as pressure on a specific nerve cluster in her wrist sent signals of alarm through her nervous system. Olivia released Heather's wrist after precisely 2 seconds, enough to make her point without causing lasting damage. Tactical demonstration, complete minimal force, applied the training protocols, whispered in her mind, movement, complete withdrawal. To safe distance, Olivia took 1 step back pocket. The photograph established defensive posture. Observe hostile reaction. Heather cradled her wrist, eyes wide with shock and dawning fear. "What did you just do to me?" she demanded, voice higher than normal. Olivia remained perfectly still, her posture relaxed, yet somehow alert in a way that made Mackenzie and Vicky exchange nervous glances. "You're fine," Olivia said calmly. "Nothing's broken, nothing's damaged. I just wanted my photograph back." Heather looked at her friends, then back at Olivia, anger replacing her momentary fear. "You think you can put your hands on me, freak?" she hissed, stepping forward again. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Olivia's eyes flickered briefly to each exit, calculating angles and distances to potential weapons furniture that could be utilized, or obstacles to avoid, her mind automatically cataloguing threats and advantages the way she'd been trained since age 14. Lieutenant Ramirez's voice echoed in her memory. "Situation assessment is continuous, never static. Adapt to changing conditions. I know exactly who I'm dealing with." Olivia replied, her voice remaining level. "I've known since day one. I just didn't care." The simple statement, delivered without emotion, somehow carried more weight than any threat could have. The library had gone completely silent. Students at nearby tables now openly staring. Some had phones out recording the confrontation that was clearly heading somewhere unexpected. Heather's face flushed with humiliation. She gestured to Mackenzie and Vicky, "Grab her stuff." She ordered. The 2 girls hesitated for a fraction of a second, but Heather's glare set them in motion. Vicky reached for Olivia's calculus textbook. "I wouldn't, Olivia," said the simple warning, freezing Vicky in place. Something in her tone suggested consequences beyond what any high school student should be capable of. "What are you going to do?" Heather challenged, her voice carrying false bravery. "Fight all 3 of us?" Olivia tilted her head slightly, as though considering the question, not the response Heather had expected if necessary. She answered with the same unnerving calm. "Though I'd prefer not to fight anyone." Her eyes never left Heather, even as she tracked the other girl's movements in her peripheral vision. The tension in the air had become almost unbearable. Students from across the library were now gathering at a safe distance, drawn by the unusual confrontation most had only ever seen. Olivia, as the quiet transfer student who never spoke now, she stood facing down the school's most feared bully group with an air of absolute confidence that seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Mackenzie, tired of the standoff, decided to take action. She was the athlete, after all, a district champion sprinter. She moved suddenly, trying to flank Olivia and grab her from behind. What happened next would be replayed on dozens of student phones. By evening, Olivia moved with such fluid precision that it almost looked choreographed. She simply wasn't where Mackenzie expected her to be, stepping aside at the exact moment to cause the taller girl to overextend, then using minimal contact to redirect Mackenzie's momentum in a controlled pivot that sent her stumbling into a nearby study carrel. Without Olivia appearing to exert any real force, it looked like Mackenzie had simply tripped over her own feet, except for the brief moment of contact that everyone saw, but few could process, I asked. "Nicely," Olivia said, still in that unnervingly calm voice. "Now I'm telling you, leave my belongings alone and walk away." Vicky backed up instantly, hands raised. "I'm done with this," she muttered. "This is getting weird." Heather stood her ground, though. Pride and reputation at stake. "Are you some kind of freak martial arts expert?" she demanded, trying to regain control of the situation. "Something like that," Olivia acknowledged, then added with a touch of dark humor. "Though I wouldn't call it martial arts." "Exactly," the gathered students whispered among themselves. A few had already started Googling Olivia's name on their phones, curious about this suddenly intimidating girl who had materialized from the previously invisible transfer student, Kyle Chen. A junior who ran the school's unofficial news blog pushed to the front of the crowd and called out, "You're like special ops or something, right?" Olivia looked at him with a flicker of surprise that quickly disappeared. "I can't discuss that," she said, which only intensified the speculation. Heather, sensing her social capital evaporating by the second, made a desperate move. She lunged forward, hands extended, aiming to shove Olivia hard against the bookshelves. It was a mistake. Olivia sidestepped. Again, this time catching Heather's arm in a simple control hold that used leverage rather than strength to completely immobilize the taller girl. One moment, Heather was charging forward, the next, she was somehow on her knees, arm extended in a position that sent warning signals of pain without actual damage. Olivia kept her voice low-pitched for Heather's ears alone in Sentinel. "We learned how to incapacitate opponents twice our size without leaving evidence," she said, then released the hold, stepping back as Heather stumbled to her feet, cheeks burning with humiliation. "This is assault!" she shouted, looking around for support from the watching students. "I'm going to have you expelled!" Olivia shook her head slightly, hands visible and open at her, sides displaying no aggressive intent to any watching faculty who might intervene. "The security cameras in the library will show you confronted me, dumped my belongings, and damaged a personal photograph," she said, nodding toward the ceiling where, indeed, a camera was positioned. "I simply retrieved my property and defended myself, using minimal force." The word minimal hung in the air, carrying the implication that what they'd witnessed was Olivia showing restraint. Mackenzie had recovered enough to rejoin Heather, though she maintained a cautious distance from Olivia. "Who's your father, really?" Mackenzie asked, her curiosity temporarily overcoming her embarrassment. Olivia's expression flickered for just a moment, a crack in the professional facade. "Colonel Michael Winters," she said after a brief hesitation. "Special Forces Bravo team. He trained me since I could walk. Then the military program recruited me when I was 14, but that's classified." Her gaze sharpened, realizing she'd said more than intended. A few students had already begun searching the name on their phones within seconds. Someone called out, "Holy shit, her dad was a war hero, got the Silver Star and everything." Other whispers spread rapidly through the crowd. Sentinel. Program Teenager Military Training Secret Government Project. Heather looked around, seeing her social standing deteriorating by the second, but when she turned back to Olivia, her anger had been replaced by something closer to fear. "Why did you let us push you around for months if you could do this stuff?" Olivia considered the question before answering, because responding wasn't necessary. She said simply, "I was taught that force is the last resort, not the first, and that emotional control is more important than physical dominance." Heather stared at Olivia as though seeing her for the first time. "You're actually serious, aren't you?" Olivia nodded. "Once you never bothered to know anything about me." She said the words carrying no accusation. Just statement of fact, you just saw someone quiet and small and decided I was an acceptable target. Her gaze swept over the three girls before returning to Heather. Being quiet doesn't mean being weak. Being small doesn't mean being defenseless. And being new doesn't mean being alone. She shouldered her backpack, having collected her belongings while they talked. This is over, she announced to everyone watching. I have no interest in conflict with anyone at this school. But she looked directly at Heather now. I won't be targeted again, either by you or anyone else. Her voice carried through the silent library, clear and commanding. It was the voice of someone used to being obeyed, someone whose words carried weight beyond her years. She turned and walked toward the library exit, the crowd of students parting before her without hesitation, the movement so reminiscent of Moses and the Red Sea that someone actually whispered the reference under their breath. Wait, Heather called her voice. Cracking slightly with unfamiliar uncertainty, Olivia paused, looking back, with one eyebrow raised. Heather struggled visibly with whatever she wanted to say, pride warring with the new reality she found herself in. The carefully constructed social hierarchy of Pinecrest High had been upended in less than 5 minutes by a girl who until today had been practically invisible. Did they teach you to fight like that, in that sentinel thing? She finally asked the question, seemingly genuine for once rather than mocking. Olivia studied her for a moment, considering her response. They taught us many things, she said. Finally some I hope I never have to use. She turned and continued walking away, leaving Heather standing among scattered textbooks and dozens of staring students. The video of the confrontation would spread through the school's social networks within hours, reaching hundreds of views before administrators managed to contain it somewhat, but nothing could contain the stories that spread about Olivia Winters, Special Forces kid, secret government experiment-trained killer. Even teachers found themselves watching her with new eyes in class. The changes at Pinecrest High were immediate and dramatic. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know Olivia Winters' name. Students who had never given her a second glance now watched her movements in the hallways with fascinated attention, whispering behind their hands as she passed. Most gave her a wide berth, partly out of newfound respect, partly out of the uncertain fear that comes from realizing someone you'd dismissed completely was something else entirely. The story had grown in the telling. With each retelling, Olivia's capabilities became more exceptional. Some versions claimed she'd disabled all three girls with pressure point techniques. Others insisted she'd mentioned Black Ops training. A few even suggested her transfer to Pinecrest was part of some government protection program. The truth, as always, was more complex and less sensational. Olivia found the attention far more uncomfortable than the previous invisibility. Situational awareness had been drilled into her since childhood. Every extra glance, every whispered comment registered as potential threat input, her mind constantly processing environmental data in the background as she moved through her day. The irony wasn't lost on her. Project Sentinel had trained her to remain unnoticed, to blend seamlessly into any environment. Now she stood out precisely because of that training. The weight of dozens of curious eyes following her movements triggered the same physiological responses as hostile surveillance. Her pulse elevated slightly, breathing pattern altered marginally. Adjustments she had to consciously override, reminding herself, this isn't a mission, this is high school, normal teenage life. Whatever that means. Heather Blackwood struggled with the situation. Far more visibly, the humiliation of being so efficiently neutralized in front of half the student body had shattered something fundamental in her worldview. For years, her social position had seemed unassailable, built on family connections, athletic accomplishments and carefully cultivated fear. Now students who wouldn't have dared to meet her eyes a week ago were openly discussing her confrontation with Olivia in the cafeteria. The whispers followed her through hallways. Did you see how that New girl took her down without even trying, and she didn't even fight back, just stood there and took it. The shame of it burned worse than any physical pain could have. 3 days after the library incident, Heather found Olivia sitting alone in the courtyard during lunch period, the space around her conspicuously empty, despite the crowded tables nearby, students still uncertain how to approach this new version of the formerly invisible girl. "Can I sit?" Heather asked, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Olivia looked up from her book and gestured to the empty seat without comment. Heather sat down heavily, her usual entourage notably absent. "I wanted to talk to you." She began, then stopped, seeming to struggle with the unfamiliar position of supplicant rather than dictator about what happened. Olivia marked her place in the book and closed it, giving Heather her full attention, the same focused intensity that had been so unnerving in the library, though now tempered with something. "That might have been curiosity. I'm listening," she said simply. Heather looked down at the table, her perfectly manicured nails tapping an anxious rhythm against the surface. "I wanted to say," she began, then stopped again. "I mean about what happened in the library, and before that. All of it, really." Olivia waited, saying nothing, her stillness another trait from her training, the ability to remain motionless, conserving energy while gathering information. "I'm sorry." Heather finally managed the words, sounding rusty and unfamiliar in her mouth, "for the photo and your stuff, and for what I said about your dad. That was—" She glanced up briefly, crossing over a line. Olivia nodded once in acknowledgement, continuing to wait. Heather, growing uncomfortable, in the silence, rushed to fill it. "I didn't know about your dad being military or whatever, and I definitely didn't know about you being in that program thing. I just thought." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Honestly, you thought I was—" Weak Olivia supplied, her voice neutral, not accusatory, just completing the obvious thought. Heather winced but nodded. "Yeah. And I guess I wanted to believe that, because it made me feel." She struggled again. Strong, powerful, something. Olivia finished. "And for her, when she didn't continue, and does it?" Heather looked up, confused. "Does targeting people who seem vulnerable make you feel strong?" Olivia clarified, her head tilted slightly, in what appeared to be genuine curiosity. Heather's cheeks flushed. "I've been thinking about that, actually," she admitted, "since what happened, and the answer is yes, it did. But now it just makes me feel like a coward." The honesty seemed to surprise Heather herself, the words tumbling out before she could censor them. Olivia considered this, her expression thoughtful. "Lieutenant Ramirez used to say that understanding your own motivations is the first step to controlling them," she offered. "After a moment in training, we spent as much time on psychological conditioning as physical techniques. The strongest fighter isn't the one who hits hardest. It's the one who understands the battle inside themselves." Heather stared at her. "Is that really what they taught you in a military program that sounds more like therapy than combat training?" Olivia's lips quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. Project Sentinel wasn't a typical military program. She explained, carefully measuring her words. "We were being trained for complex operations, where physical confrontation was the last resort, not the first. Understanding human psychology, including our own, was considered essential to mission success." She paused, then added, "Sometimes the most dangerous battlefield is in your own mind." Heather was quiet for a moment, absorbing this. "That's actually deep," she finally said, then, with a trace of her old sharpness, added, "and not what I expected from someone who can apparently take down 3 people without breaking a sweat." Olivia's almost smile returned, a microscopic softening around her eyes that would have been invisible to anyone. Without training in reading micro-expressions, most people have layers. Heather assumptions are operational liabilities. Another Ramirez quote, I'm gathering. Heather said with the first genuine smile Olivia had seen from her, "You must have 1 million of those. He was my primary instructor for 3 years." Olivia explained he believed in teaching principles, not just techniques. By the end, we could all quote him. In our sleep, the casual mention of "we" caught Heather's attention. "There were others like you in this program?" she asked, leaning forward with interest. Olivia nodded. 15 of us originally, she said, then caught herself. I shouldn't discuss details. But yes, I wasn't the only one. A silence fell between them, not entirely uncomfortable as Heather processed this information. You miss it, don't you? She finally asked the program, your friends there? Olivia looked away for the first time, her gaze scanning the courtyard in what seemed like habit rather than any real interest in their surroundings. Yes, she admitted, sometimes in Sentinel. Everything was clear, objectives, metrics, teammates, roles out here. She gestured vaguely at the school campus. Everything is undefined. The parameters keep changing. Social dynamics are unpredictable. She stopped herself with a small shake of her head, realizing she'd said more than intended. Heather laughed softly. That's just high school, Olivia. It's unpredictable for all of us. Olivia considered this before nodding. I'm beginning to understand that. She acknowledged. The bell rang, signaling the end of lunch period. Both girls gathered their belongings, preparing to head to separate classes. Can I ask you something? Heather said as they stood. Olivia nodded. Why didn't you fight back sooner if you could do all that stuff? Why let us bother you for months? Olivia considered the question carefully. Something deeper than simple restraint had kept her from responding. To the harassment, yet putting it into words was difficult. Finally, she said, when Project Sentinel was shut down, our final instruction was to integrate into civilian life as completely as possible. No demonstrations of our training, no unusual capabilities, no drawing attention. She picked up her backpack, adjusting the straps with precise movements. I was following orders until I wasn't. Something fundamental shifted in Heather's understanding. As the implications of this settled, in you were literally trained to take it, she said slowly, to just absorb whatever happened without responding. Olivia nodded again. Unless there was no alternative, she confirmed. Threat assessment is ongoing. Response should be proportional to actual danger, not perceived. Insult. Heather shook her head. That's messed up. They taught teenagers to just take abuse. Olivia's expression remained neutral. They taught us discipline, she corrected, and perspective. Not. Everything requires a response. Reacting to every provocation is inefficient and often counterproductive. Heather fell silent, processing this, then asked the question that had clearly been bothering her. So what changed in the library? Why respond? Then Olivia's expression shifted subtly, a flash of something, raw and genuine, crossing her features before disappearing back behind her controlled exterior. The photograph, she said simply, it's the only one I have. Heather nodded, understanding. Sometimes a line is a line, she agreed, standing up straighter. Will you sit with us tomorrow? She asked, gesturing toward her usual table where Mackenzie and Vicky were pointedly not watching their interaction. Olivia hesitated, visibly surprised by the invitation, uncertain how to respond to this unexpected social development. I'll think about it, she finally said, then added with a trace of dry humor, they might not be comfortable with that. Heather's smile turned rueful. Mackenzie's still convinced you could kill someone with your pinky finger, she admitted. And Vicky's been researching Black Ops teenage recruitment since the library. I think they'd both rather have you at the table than risk being on your bad side. Olivia actually laughed at that, a short, startled sound quickly controlled. I don't have a bad side, she said. Just training. The clarification didn't seem particularly reassuring based on Heather's expression as they parted ways, heading to their respective classes. Olivia found herself analyzing the interaction, cataloging social cues, response patterns, potential motivations, the same way she'd been taught to break down complex operational scenarios. It was exhausting. Sometimes this constant processing, but she didn't know how to stop. The mental protocols ran automatically like background programs in a computer, always active, always assessing. She wondered briefly what Lieutenant Ramirez would think of her now, using her training to navigate high school politics rather than whatever covert operations Sentinel had been preparing them for. Would he be disappointed or amused? Probably both, she decided, remembering his rare smile that seemed to contain equal parts pride and exasperation whenever one of his students surprised him. Life is never the missions you expect. Winters, he'd told her once during a particularly grueling training exercise, it's all the ones you don't see coming that define you. The library confrontation certainly qualified as unexpected, and its aftermath was proving equally unpredictable. Olivia suspected that navigating her new social reality would require every bit as much tactical awareness as any Sentinel operation over. The following weeks, Pinecrest High settled into a new equilibrium. Olivia remained largely the same quiet, studious girl she'd always been. But now her silence was interpreted as mysterious rather than weak students who had previously ignored her. Existence now noticed her precise movements, her exceptional situational awareness, the way she could enter a room and immediately appear to catalogue every exit and potential threat without seeming to look around. There was an impromptu betting pool about her background, with theories ranging from witness protection to classified military experiments. The truth was simultaneously more ordinary and more complex than any of the rumors. The most surprising development was Olivia's tentative friendship with Heather, not immediate, not without awkward moments, but gradually developing through shared lunches and chemistry lab partnership. Heather had undergone her own transformation, though less visible than Olivia's revelation. Her public humbling had forced self-reflection that few teenagers voluntarily undertake. I've been talking to my counselor about colleges, Heather mentioned one afternoon as they worked on balancing equations, looking for psychology programs with strong research components. Olivia looked up with mild surprise. Interesting choice, she observed, measuring out a precise amount of solution for their experiment. Human behavior fascinates me, Heather admitted, especially since everything with you made me realize how little. I understand why people do what they do, myself included. The self-awareness was new and still uncomfortable, but genuine. Mackenzie and Vicky had adjusted to the new social arrangement. With varying degrees of acceptance, Mackenzie remained wary, keeping physical distance between herself and Olivia at all times. I still don't get why you're hanging out with her, Mackenzie muttered to Heather during track practice. She literally threw me across the library. Heather rolled her eyes at the exaggeration. She redirected your momentum, she corrected, and only after you tried to grab her first. There's a difference. Mackenzie scowled. Whatever, she could probably take down the entire football team if she wanted to, which was precisely why Mackenzie's wariness wasn't entirely irrational. Vicky, on the other hand, had developed an almost academic interest in Olivia. Her initial fear transforming into fascination, she bombarded Olivia with carefully worded questions, trying to extract information about Sentinel. Without triggering whatever classified information protocols she imagined Olivia operated under, this research is purely theoretical. Of course, Vicky would say with transparent innocence, for my political science paper on youth military programs. Olivia would respond with the same patient non-answer. I can't discuss operational details. Principal Alvarez called Olivia into her office 2 weeks after the library incident, looking distinctly uncomfortable as Olivia took a seat across from her. Desk, Miss Winters, she began, then stopped, clearing her throat. Some concerning videos have been circulating among the student body. Olivia remained silent, hands folded in her lap posture, perfect back, straight eyes, focused just slightly to the right of the principal's face, a position that appeared attentive while minimizing direct eye contact, a technique for reducing perceived threat during interrogation. I understand. There was an altercation in the library. The principal continued when Olivia didn't respond. I was retrieving my property, Olivia stated simply, which had been taken without permission. Principal Alvarez shuffled papers on her desk, clearly struggling with how to approach the situation. The videos show you using what appears to be military-grade combat techniques on other students, Miss Winters. I used minimal necessary force to protect myself and my property. Olivia corrected, her voice calm and factual. The videos also clearly show I was cornered by 3 students who had been harassing me for months. Harassment that was previously reported to this office with no action taken. Principal Alvarez had the grace to look uncomfortable at this accurate assessment. Before school policy on physical altercations is very clear. She began, but Olivia interrupted respectfully. Perhaps you should review the complete security footage, Principal Alvarez, not just student cell phone videos, before making determinations about policy violations. The measured suggestion delivered in Olivia's unnervingly adult manner gave the principal pause. Something had changed in her understanding of the quiet transfer student she'd previously dismissed. "Are you threatening me, Ms. Winters?" she asked, her voice sharper than intended. Olivia blinked, genuine surprise crossing her features. "No, ma'am. I'm simply suggesting due diligence in fact-finding before conclusions are drawn. Standard procedural protocol in any investigation." The phrasing was so clearly institutional that Principal Alvarez found herself wondering exactly what kind of background this teenager actually had. "I'll review the complete footage," she conceded, then added more gently, "Is there something you'd like to tell me, Olivia, about your background or why you transferred to Pinecrest?" Olivia's expression closed like shutters being drawn. "My transcript should have all relevant educational information," she replied, "and my guardian completed all required registration documentation." Principal Alvarez sighed, recognizing the deflection for what it was. "Very well, Ms. Winters, you're dismissed for now, but I expect any future conflicts to be reported to staff immediately, not handled personally." Olivia stood with that same fluid economy of movement that some teachers had begun to notice and comment on in the break. "A room, yes, ma'am," she acknowledged, before turning to leave at the door. She paused, looking back, though. "I hope there won't be any future conflicts to report." The principal noticed she didn't phrase it as a preference, but almost as a warning. Kyle Chen, the junior who ran the school's unofficial news blog, had become Olivia's most persistent shadow, researching everything he could find about Project Sentinel and special operations training for minors. Most of his searches led to conspiracy theory, websites or redacted government documents, but he persisted with the dedication of a born investigator. "Hey, Olivia, wait up," he called one afternoon. As she walked toward the student parking lot, she paused, allowing him to catch up, though her expression suggested limited patience for whatever was coming. "I found something interesting about Sentinel," he said, slightly breathless from running across the parking lot. Olivia's face remained carefully neutral, though he thought he detected a slight tension in her shoulders. "I told you, Kyle. I can't discuss classified programs," she said, beginning to walk again, forcing him to keep pace. "But this is public information, kind of." He insisted. A military budget hearing from 3 years ago, Senator Martinez questioned funding for, quote, specialized youth preparedness initiatives with potential international deployment applications, close quote. Sound familiar? Olivia continued, walking her pace steady. "I don't follow politics much." "Kyle," she replied, but he wasn't deterred. The program was shut down after ethics violations were raised. He continued, "Martinez specifically mentioned concerns about, quote, psychological conditioning techniques and combat training for minors without adequate civilian oversight, close quote." Olivia stopped abruptly, turning to face him with an expression that made him take an involuntary step backward. "Kyle," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an edge that raised the hair on his neck. "I understand you're curious, and I respect good research, but you need to stop digging into this." Now he swallowed, but pressed on. "Is it true that Sentinel participants were being prepared for deep cover operations in foreign countries? Because the documentation suggests." Olivia Moved so quickly, Kyle didn't register what happened until he found himself gently but firmly pressed against a parked car, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, in what would appear to any observer as a friendly gesture, but which somehow communicated absolute control. "Kyle, I like you," she said conversationally, "but you're asking questions about matters that remain classified, despite program termination that could potentially endanger former participants." She stepped back, releasing him and adjusting her backpack. As though nothing had happened. "These aren't stories for your blog. They're people's lives, mine included." Kyle stared at her, processing what had just happened, the casual demonstration of her capabilities more effective than any verbal threat could. "Have been sorry," he managed. "I didn't think about it that way. I was just trying to uncover the truth." Olivia's expression softened marginally. "Not all truths need uncovering," she said then, with a hint of the dry humor he'd occasionally glimpsed besides. "There are plenty of school scandals you could investigate instead. I heard Coach Diaz is dating Ms. Peterson from the English department." The deliberate redirect worked as Kyle's eyes widened, with journalistic interest seriously. The teacher romance angle would generate way more clicks than military conspiracy theories anyway. "Thanks for the tip." "Olivia." He hurried off, already planning his stakeout of the teacher's parking lot. So Olivia continued to her car, a 10-year-old Honda Civic that had belonged to her father, shaking her head slightly as she watched Kyle's retreating figure. The exchange had been a calculated risk, using minimized physical contact to establish dominance, while offering an alternative target for his curiosity. Basic redirection tactics from Sentinel's influence training curriculum, but effective. Nonetheless, she slid into the driver's seat, allowing herself a moment of stillness before starting the engine, checking mirrors, adjusting seat, performing the pre-drive checklist that had been drilled into her since she was tall enough to reach the pedals. These routines, these patterns were comforting in their familiarity when so much else in her life had changed. At home, a small apartment she shared with her Aunt Margaret, her father's sister Olivia maintained many of the disciplines from her Sentinel days: physical conditioning, information security protocols, situational awareness. It wasn't that she couldn't stop more, that she didn't know how to exist. Without these frameworks, they had become as automatic as breathing. Aunt Margaret worried about her, of course. Had worried since the day the stern-faced officers had arrived to inform them that Project Sentinel was being discontinued and Olivia would be returning to civilian life, effective immediately. The transition had been abrupt, no decompression period, minimal psychological support, just classified debriefings, non-disclosure agreements, and a plane ticket home to a family member who barely knew how to connect with the disciplined, focused teenager who had replaced the child she remembered. Olivia was working through a series of precise calisthenics movements when her aunt knocked gently on her bedroom door. "Come in," she called, not breaking her rhythm as she completed the set. Margaret entered, carrying a mug of tea which she set on the desk. Watching her niece with a mixture of concern and pride that had become familiar. "You had a good day at school?" she asked. It wasn't really a question. Olivia had long ago realized her aunt had developed her own observational skills out of necessity, to read the subtle cues in Olivia's behavior that indicated her mental state better than yesterday. Olivia acknowledged, reaching for a towel to wipe away sweat from her workout. No incidents, no confrontations she had taken to giving these brief, mission-style reports, knowing they reassured her aunt more than typical teenage responses like "fine" or whatever. Margaret smiled slightly at the familiar format. "Dr. Abernathy called today," she mentioned casually, though Olivia could tell from her aunt's slightly elevated pulse, visible in the artery at her neck, that the casualness was forced. Dr. Abernathy was the civilian psychologist assigned to former Sentinel participants for transition support. The mandated monthly check-ins were part of the program dissolution agreement. "What did she want?" Olivia asked. Toweling off her hair, She needs to reschedule next week's session. Margaret replied, and she mentioned something about a group meeting with other former participants. Olivia froze mid-motion, the towel still pressed against her neck. "They're organizing a group session," she asked, carefully keeping her voice neutral, though inside her mind was racing. "Calculating possibilities, assessing potential security concerns, evaluating objectives, Doctor." "Abernathy thought it might help with your adjustment," Margaret explained, "especially after what happened at school. Apparently, several other participants have had similar incidents while integrating into civilian environments." Olivia nodded slowly. Of course, they had Sentinel training created specific behavioral patterns that inevitably generated friction with normal teenage social structures. They had all been experiencing versions of her library confrontation in their respective schools. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "Non-committal, we'll discuss it after dinner," Margaret replied, recognizing the deflection, but choosing not to push. Both women had developed a careful dance around difficult topics, each respecting the other's boundaries. While trying to build a family relationship from the fractured pieces they'd been given, the group session was scheduled for Saturday afternoon at a nondescript office building downtown, far enough from residential areas to ensure privacy close enough to public transportation to be accessible without drawing attention. Typical Sentinel operational planning, Olivia thought as she approached the building, scanning for surveillance cameras, security personnel, potential choke points, and exit routes, all automatically without conscious effort. 4 years of training didn't disappear just because the program had been officially disbanded inside a reception area with generic landscape paintings and uncomfortable-looking chairs. A middle-aged woman with steel-rimmed glasses checked identification against a tablet. Olivia noticed she wore a lanyard with military contractor credentials partially hidden beneath her cardigan third-floor room. 312, the receptionist said in a brisk professional tone that suggested familiarity with confidential operations. The elevator required keycard access, which the receptionist provided, revealing previous military training in her efficient movements and the way she positioned herself to maintain sight. Lines to both the entrance and the security monitors. Olivia was the third to arrive, 2 others already seated in the bland conference room, maintaining optimal distance from each other, and the door. Her entrance triggered immediate assessments from both. Physical posture shifted slightly, hands adjusted position to enable defensive movements if necessary. Eyes tracked her precise scan of the room. Sentinel graduates. All of them she recognized, one boy immediately. Elliot Chen, recruited 2 months. After her from California, if she remembered correctly. The other, a girl with close-cropped dark hair, was unfamiliar, but her behavioral patterns were unmistakable. Sentinel Olivia acknowledged with a slight nod, taking a seat that offered clear views of both the door and windows. Elliot Chen and the unknown girl relaxed fractionally at her deliberate choice of non-threatening positioning. Team recognition protocols still active after all this time. 4 more former participants arrived over the next 10 minutes each, following the same assessment patterns, each selecting seating based on tactical considerations rather than social preference, none speaking beyond necessary acknowledgements. They ranged in age from 16 to 19, physically diverse in appearance, but identical in their controlled movements and hyper-awareness. The silence wasn't uncomfortable for any of them. They had all been trained to maintain operational silence for extended periods, communication happening through subtle hand signals and micro-expressions, more efficient than words. In many situations, the door opened a final time, admitting a tall woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. Lieutenant Ramirez. Olivia thought with a jolt of surprise, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. Their former trainer looked exactly the same as she had during Sentinel, right down to the precise military posture and calculating gaze that missed nothing good. "Afternoon," Lieutenant Ramirez said. Closing the door behind her, I see the observational training hasn't deteriorated, she noted with dry approval, watching as 7 pairs of eyes tracked her movement to the front of the room. Before I begin this session, I need to clarify that my presence here is unofficial, she stated without preamble. I'm here as Dr. Abernathy's consultant, not as your sentinel instructor. The program remains officially disbanded. The clarification was necessary but changed nothing in how the former participants regarded her. Lieutenant Ramirez had been the primary architect of their training, the voice in their heads during critical decision points, the authority who had shaped their responses to nearly every scenario they encountered. Formative conditioning didn't disappear with program termination. I understand you've all been experiencing adjustment difficulties. Ramirez continued, her gaze moving deliberately from face to face, cataloging micro-reactions. This is not unexpected. Sentinel training created specific behavioral parameters that conflict with normal, adolescent social environments. Elliot raised his hand, a habitual response that drew a flicker of amusement across Ramirez's otherwise stern features. Lieutenant, he began, then corrected himself. Ms. Ramirez, we were told during decommissioning that integration protocols would be sufficient for civilian adjustment. That proved inaccurate. Ramirez nodded. Integration protocols were designed based on limited civilian behavior models. She acknowledged they failed to account for the unpredictability of teenage social hierarchies, particularly the prevalence of targeted harassment. The dark-haired girl Olivia didn't recognize made a sound of agreement. I've been through 3 schools in 8 months, she said, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who rarely speaks each time the same pattern occurs. I maintain operational cover, avoiding attention, following integration protocols. Then some incident forces capability demonstration, resulting in security compromise. Olivia recognized the description immediately. It mirrored her own experience at Pinecrest, so precisely it could have been taken from her mental after-action report. Ramirez looked unsurprised by this account. Jessica's experience mirrors reports from most of you. She confirmed, we're detecting consistent pattern failures in the transition framework. Several participants exchanged glances. All of you were selected for Sentinel, partially based on psychological profiles, indicating high impulse control and conflict avoidance. Ramirez continued, which makes the behavioral standards expected by integration protocols theoretically achievable. But she paused, studying their reactions. We failed to adequately account for one critical variable, which is Olivia found herself asking the question, automatically slipping back into the familiar training dynamic. Normal teenagers don't follow rational behavior models. Ramirez replied, the hint of a smile touching her lips. They operate on social imperatives that frequently override logical decision-making. Their harassment patterns escalate specifically when targets don't provide expected emotional responses. Several heads nodded in recognition of this assessment. Olivia thought about Heather's growing frustration with her non-reactions, the way the bullying had intensified, precisely because she hadn't responded in expected ways. So what's the solution? Elliot asked, the most conflict-prone among them even during Sentinel training. Always pushing boundaries, always questioning integration protocols clearly don't work. And we can't maintain operational cover when forced into defensive responses. Ramirez's expression turned serious. That's why I'm here unofficially. She stated the Pentagon won't acknowledge the transition failure, but those of us who work directly with you recognize the pattern forming in civilian incident reports. She moved to the whiteboard, uncapping a marker with military precision. The integration framework requires modification, she said, beginning to write in the same neat block letters. They all remembered from training sessions, you need adaptive protocols, not absolute ones. For the next hour, Ramirez outlined a revised framework for civilian integration, incorporating controlled behavioral variations rather than strict compliance. Models authorized capability demonstrations in measured contexts, rather than complete suppression, tactical social engagement rather than isolation. And most surprisingly, emotional authenticity within defined parameters, the complete opposite of their original training, which had emphasized emotional suppression and behavioral consistency. We designed Sentinel to create perfect operators, Ramirez admitted as she concluded the presentation. But perfect operators aren't functional teenagers. The skill is knowing when to be, which as she spoke, Olivia felt something shift inside her, a recalibration of internal frameworks that had been rigid for so long now appeared capable of flexibility. Sentinel had trained them to think in absolutes. Operational or non-operational compliant or non-compliant mission parameters, as fixed boundaries within which all decisions must fall. You're telling us to selectively break programming, Jessica said, her voice reflecting the cognitive dissonance. They all felt, I'm telling you to adapt it, Ramirez corrected. These aren't new skills, they're applications of existing training. Adaptive response was always part of Sentinel, but the context has changed. You're no longer preparing for covert operations. You're preparing for life. She studied their reactions carefully, measuring the impact of her words. This isn't about forgetting your training. It's about controlling its application in civilian contexts. Olivia thought about her confrontation with Heather in the library, how she had finally broken from the absolute compliance model when something truly important was threatened, her father's photograph. The only tangible connection to her previous life, the deviation had felt like failure at the time, a loss of control. Now Ramirez was suggesting it had been appropriate adaptive response. One by one, they shared their civilian incident reports in precise operational language. Elliot described a physical confrontation with 3 senior football players who had targeted his younger brother. Jessica detailed her calculated intimidation of a teacher who had been systematically undermining female students. Others recounted similar scenarios where Sentinel training had emerged despite integration protocols, each incident following the same pattern: extended compliance with harassment, followed by sudden decisive response when critical boundaries were violated with each report. Ramirez nodded, making notes, offering tactical refinements for future scenarios, not criticizing the breach of protocol, but analyzing how it could have been executed more effectively with less collateral impact. Olivia shared her library confrontation last, delivering the details with clinical precision. Response parameters, behavioral indicators, threat assessment, the entire sequence broken down into its component parts, just as they'd been taught to report. Mission outcomes. Your demonstration of capability was proportional to the threat, Ramirez concluded after hearing Olivia's account, and your subsequent management of social dynamics shows promising adaptation. She tapped her marker against the whiteboard where she'd listed key principles of the revised framework, the strategic redirection. Of the school blogger particularly effective, she added an unexpected compliment that Olivia acknowledged with a slight nod. The entire group seemed to be processing the conceptual shift from rigid compliance to adaptive response, some more easily than others. Jessica still appeared skeptical. Will this actually work, she asked, or are we just rationalizing behavioral inconsistency? Ramirez considered the question with respect. These aren't inconsistencies, she said finally. They're tactical variations. Based on environmental assessment, the core principles remain. Operational security remains paramount. Excessive force remains prohibited. Mission objectives simply shift from maintaining absolute cover to maintaining functional integration after The formal session concluded. Ramirez asked Olivia to remain behind. The others filed out with military precision, each acknowledging Ramirez with the same respectful nod they'd used during Sentinel Day's old habits, resurfacing in her presence when they were alone. Ramirez's formal demeanor softened slightly. "Your aunt reports you're maintaining rigorous physical training protocols," she observed, moving to sit across from Olivia, not at the head of the table anymore, but adjacent, signaling a shift from instructor to advisor. Olivia nodded. "I find it stabilizing," she admitted. "Structure helps with the transition." Ramirez studied her with the penetrating gaze that had always made Sentinel participants feel transparent. "Colonel Winters would be proud of your adaptation," she said quietly. The unexpected mention of her father caught Olivia off guard. "He believed in your potential, even before Sentinel recruitment." The personal comment from the usually reserved Ramirez created an unfamiliar and tightness in Olivia's chest. He never saw the end result. She said, her voice carefully controlled. Ramirez's expression held something almost like compassion, a rare break in her professional mask. "He saw enough to know what you would become," she said. "Your performance metrics were exceptional, Olivia, but your psychological resilience was what truly distinguished you in the program. That resilience will serve you now in ways Sentinel never anticipated." The conversation shifted to specific adaptation strategies for Olivia's current situation at Pinecrest. Ramirez offering tactical assessments of her handling of Heather Kyle and the school administration. When they finished, Ramirez walked her to the elevator, maintaining professional distance, but with a subtle shift in demeanor that suggested something closer to mentorship than the strict instructor-trainee dynamic of Sentinel days. "Remember," Winters Ramirez said, as the elevator arrived, "integration isn't about erasing who you are. It's about controlling when and how you reveal it." Olivia nodded, understanding the nuanced distinction. As the doors closed, she caught a final glimpse of Ramirez watching her with an expression that might almost have been pride. The revised framework Ramirez had created immediate changes in Olivia's approach to Pinecrest. She began implementing adaptive protocols rather than rigid compliance, selectively revealing aspects of her training in measured contexts while maintaining core operational security. Her conversations with Heather and her friends became less guarded, more authentic, though still carefully controlled. Olivia found herself sharing sanitized versions of Sentinel experiences, tactical training scenarios modified to sound like ordinary military cadet activities, physical conditioning requirements described as specialized athletics program. The partial truths served dual purposes, maintaining security, while satisfying curiosity without encouraging further investigation. Heather absorbed these stories with fascination. "You really did push-ups in freezing water?" she asked incredulously during lunch one day, as Olivia described a modified version of cold weather endurance training. Olivia nodded, allowing a small smile at the memory. "Hypothermia resistance training." She explained, "We had to maintain precise form while our muscles were shutting down. They pulled anyone whose form deteriorated." Vicky, who had gradually overcome her wariness, leaned forward. "That sounds like literal torture," she observed. "Why would you voluntarily do that?" Olivia considered her response, balancing operational security against the new directive for controlled authenticity. "It taught us that physical discomfort is temporary, but discipline is enduring," she finally said, echoing Lieutenant Ramirez's training mantra without attribution. "When you can function at your worst, you never doubt yourself at your best." Mackenzie, who still maintained physical distance from Olivia, but had developed grudging respect, nodded unexpectedly. "That actually makes sense," she said. "Our track coach says something similar about pushing through the wall." The comparison wasn't entirely accurate, but Olivia recognized the value in normalizing her experiences, finding civilian parallels that made her training comprehensible to outsiders. Heather studied her with newfound understanding. So all those months when we were she paused, searching for an acceptable euphemism, being complete bitches to you. Vicky supplied helpfully. Heather shot her an annoyed glance, but continued. You were just like what? Treating it as an endurance exercise. Olivia's lips quirked slightly, and that almost smile that had become more frequent since the Ramirez consultation. Not exactly, she replied. It was more automatic than conscious conditional response patterns from training. The explanation seemed to both fascinate and disturb Heather. So they basically programmed you not to fight back. She said, that's seriously messed up. Olivia had begun recognizing these moments when civilian perspectives on Sentinel differed dramatically from participant experience. What seemed logical within. Program parameters often appeared troubling or even abusive when described to outsiders. The purpose wasn't to prevent defense. Olivia clarified it was to ensure defense occurred only when tactically necessary. Emotional reactions compromise operational efficiency. Mackenzie made a face that's robot talk. She declared, waving a French fry for emphasis, you're basically saying they trained you not to have feelings. Olivia considered this oversimplification. We had feelings, she corrected, we just didn't act on them without authorization. The three girls stared at her with expressions ranging from fascination to horror until Vicky finally broke the silence. Well, that explains so much about you, she said, her analytical mind connecting data points. That completely tracks with everything I've observed about your behavior patterns. Olivia implemented other aspects of Ramirez's revised framework as well. Strategic social engagement replaced her previous isolation. She joined the school's debate club, leveraging her tactical analysis training in competitive argument without revealing its origins. She accepted invitations to social gatherings, maintaining operational awareness while participating in normal teenage activities. She even attended a football game with Heather's group, positioning herself with optimal sightlines to all exits while attempting to understand the appeal of school spirit. The balancing act wasn't perfect. There were moments when training protocols activated automatically. In response to perceived threats, a slammed locker that triggered defensive positioning, a surprise fire drill that sent her immediately into evacuation assessment mode. A senior boy who approached too quickly from behind and found himself reflexively counter-moved before Olivia could override the response, but these incidents decreased in frequency as she calibrated her civilian parameters. The most significant test of the revised framework came during physical education class 3 weeks after. The Ramirez consultation coach Diaz had organized a self-defense workshop, bringing in a local martial arts instructor to teach basic techniques. The irony wasn't lost on Olivia, as she lined up with other female students to learn simplified versions of moves she had mastered years ago under much more demanding conditions. All right, ladies, the instructor called out, a muscular man in his 30s with the exaggerated confidence of someone used to teaching beginners. Today, we're learning how to handle attackers who grab you from behind. He demonstrated with a female assistant, showing a basic escape technique that made Olivia mentally catalogue 6 immediate flaws in execution, potentially dangerous in actual combat scenarios. Now, partner, up and practice. Remember, this is about technique, not strength. Olivia found herself paired with Jessica Morales, a quiet junior she barely knew, who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the entire exercise. You want to be the attacker or defender? Well, first, Jessica asked. Olivia shrugged. Either is fine, she replied, maintaining her cover as an ordinary student with no special knowledge. Jessica nodded. I'll defend first. You grab me from behind. Olivia moved into position, carefully moderating her grip to match what an untrained attacker might use, rather than the precisely calibrated control holds from Sentinel. Jessica attempted the demonstrated technique, but her movements were hesitant, ineffective. Olivia maintained her position. You need To commit to the movement, Olivia found herself saying, "It's about decisive action, not strength." Jessica tried again with similar results, frustration evident in her expression. After several failed attempts, Olivia made a tactical decision. "This isn't working," she said quietly. "Let me show you something more effective." Jessica looked relieved at the offer. "Okay, but I'm really not good at this physical stuff." Olivia positioned herself in front of Jessica, speaking in low tones to avoid being overheard. "The technique they're teaching requires upper body strength. Most women don't have," she explained. "I know something better." She demonstrated the modified movement at half speed first, talking Jessica through the biomechanics, leverage points and weight distribution that made it effective regardless of size differential. When Jessica tried the revised technique, she succeeded immediately. Her face lighting up with surprise that actually worked, she exclaimed. Olivia nodded, maintaining casual demeanor. While scanning to ensure the instructor hadn't noticed the deviation from his curriculum, "It uses your attacker's weight against them." She explained no strength required, just proper positioning. By the end of the class, Olivia had discreetly taught modified techniques to several struggling students, each one suddenly finding success where they had previously failed. Coach Diaz noticed the pattern, moving closer to observe. "Good work, Winters," she commented, seeming genuinely impressed. "Where'd you learn those modifications?" Olivia maintained her cover story. "My dad was military," she said with practiced casualness. "He taught me some basics for protection." Coach Diaz studied her with newfound interest. "You move like someone with formal training," she observed, "not just basics." Olivia allowed a small shrug, muscle memory from childhood practice. She deflected, then changed the subject. "Jessica's really getting it." Now the redirection worked, but Olivia noted the coach's continued analytical observation, filing it as potential security concern to monitor. The following week brought another test of her revised protocols, when Kyle Chen's unofficial school blog published a feature titled "Hidden Talents at Pinecrest." The article profiled several students with unexpected skills, including a sophomore chess champion, a junior who designed video games, and a senior with perfect pitch. Olivia's entry focused primarily on her debate team performance, but included a carefully worded paragraph about her military family background and specialized physical training. The information, while technically accurate, was deliberately vague, omitting any reference to Project Sentinel or government programs. Olivia read it during lunch, her expression neutral. While internally assessing potential security implications, Kyle approached her table with obvious nervousness. "So, what do you think?" he asked, gesturing toward his phone where the article was displayed. "Acceptable," Olivia replied, after careful consideration. "You stayed within the parameters we discussed." Kyle's relief was visible. "I told you I would," he said. "I focused on your debate skills." Instead, his journalistic instincts couldn't be entirely suppressed, though he added, "People are still curious about the library incident, you know." Olivia met his gaze directly. "Curiosity doesn't entitle people to information, Kyle," she said, her tone mild but firm. "Boundaries exist for reasons that aren't always apparent to outsiders." This philosophy extended to her, developing friendship with Heather as well, who continued to probe for details about Sentinel, usually during their study sessions in Olivia's apartment. Heather had become fascinated with the psychological aspects of the training, particularly after witnessing Olivia's automatic response to a car backfiring outside the building, her instantaneous movement to a defensive position, followed by visible self-correction. "So they conditioned you with loud noises?" Heather asked, as Olivia resumed her seat with deliberate casualness. "Sound association training," Olivia confirmed, selecting her words carefully. "Certain acoustic patterns trigger specific responses." She didn't elaborate on the extensive desensitization protocols that had gradually trained Sentinel participants to function through artillery fire, explosive detonations, and close-range gunshots. The civilian version was disturbing enough, based on Heather's expression. "That's why you flinch when doors slam," she realized, "and why you always sit facing entrances in restaurants." Olivia nodded. "It's automatic," she admitted. "Most of the conditioning is, I'm working on modifying response patterns that aren't applicable to civilian contexts." Heather processed this information, her expression thoughtful. "It's like you're reprogramming yourself," she observed, "which sounds exhausting." Olivia allowed a small smile. "Continuous adaptation is part of the training," she said then with unusual candor. Added Lieutenant Ramirez says I'm making satisfactory progress. The personal detail slipped out before she could censor it. Heather's eyebrows raised. "You're still in contact with your trainers?" she asked, surprise evident in her voice. Olivia hesitated, then implemented Ramirez's recommendation for controlled authenticity, when security concerns permit some of them. She acknowledged they provide transition support. The government has an obligation to address adjustment issues she deliberately omitted. That Ramirez's involvement was unofficial, unauthorized by Pentagon oversight. The fewer details shared, the less security risk created. Heather seemed to accept this explanation, her focus shifting. "So, do you ever miss it?" She asked the program, the structure, the others. Olivia considered the question with rare honesty. Sometimes she admitted it was challenging, but the parameters were clear objectives measurable. There was purpose to everything we did. She looked around the apartment, with its civilian furnishings, normal teenage decorations, added by Aunt Margaret to create the appearance of ordinary adolescence. "Sometimes this feels more difficult than any training scenario ever was." The uncharacteristic vulnerability in her voice surprised them both. Heather reached out hesitantly, touching Olivia's arm in a gesture of comfort that would have been unthinkable months ago. "Normal teenage life is supposed to be messy," she said. "That's kind of the point. We're all figuring it out as we go. Some of us more destructively than others," she added with self-deprecating humor, referring to her former bullying behavior. "None of us have a tactical handbook for high school." Olivia felt an unexpected laugh escape. "That's actually how I've been approaching it," she admitted. "I've been creating protocols and parameters for social interaction." Heather stared at her for a moment before bursting into laughter. "Olivia, you can't systematize being a teenager," she declared between laughs. "It's literally the most chaotic time of life." That's the whole point. Olivia found herself smiling in response, not the controlled micro-expression of Sentinel days, but something more genuine. I'm beginning to understand that she acknowledged there's a certain strategic advantage to unpredictability. Heather rolled her eyes. "Only you would find a tactical justification for normal teenage spontaneity," she said then with sudden inspiration. "We should test this theory, this weekend party at Tyler's house mission. Objective experience, authentic teenage social chaos." Interested, Olivia hesitated briefly. Threat assessment running, automatically calculating risk versus potential intelligence value in understanding civilian social dynamics within acceptable parameters. She decided with a nod. Mission accepted. The party at Tyler Harrison's house represented unknown operational territory for Olivia. Complex social dynamics, minimal security protocols, unpredictable civilian behavior patterns standing in the crowded living room. She automatically catalogued exits, potential weapons, tactical positions should intervention become necessary, before consciously overriding the assessment. This is a social gathering, not a mission. She reminded herself, implementing the relaxation techniques Ramirez had recommended for civilian integration. Heather navigated the crowd with practiced ease, occasionally glancing back to ensure Olivia was still following. "You need to stop scanning the room like you're expecting an ambush," she whispered with amused exasperation. "Just try to look like you're having fun." Olivia made a deliberate effort to soften her posture, modifying her movement patterns to mirror the casual teenage demeanor around her. "Is this better?" she asked, adopting a slightly slouched stance that felt physically uncomfortable but appeared more aligned with civilian behavioral norms. Heather laughed. "That looks painfully unnatural," she observed. "But at least you're trying." The two made their way toward the kitchen where Tyler Harrison, a senior basketball player Olivia recognized from her initial school assessment, was distributing drinks from a large cooler. "Hey, Blackwood." Tyler called over the music. "Glad you could make it." His gaze shifted to Olivia, curiosity evident. "And you brought Winters. The whole school's talking about her." He extended a plastic cup toward Olivia, who hesitated, evaluating contents before accepting. Maintaining operational awareness required avoiding substances that might compromise judgment or response time. "What's in it?" she asked, directing the question to Heather rather than Tyler, who seemed surprised by her directness. "Just punch," Heather assured her then, with a knowing look. "Nothing you'd object to." Olivia took the cup, maintaining her cover as a normal teenager, while resolving to minimize actual consumption. The kitchen opened onto a back deck where smaller groups had formed for conversations away from the thundering bass inside Mackenzie and Vicky were already there, engaged in animated discussion with several track team members. Civilian social gatherings follow tribal affiliations. Olivia noted, mentally observing how students naturally clustered according to established social hierarchies. Athletes, debate team, theater group, academic overachievers, each maintaining territorial boundaries with occasional diplomatic exchanges between allied groups. The anthropological assessment was interrupted when Kyle Chen appeared at her side, his perpetual journalist's notebook replaced by a phone. "You actually came," he said, sounding impressed. "Didn't figure military precision girl for the party type." Olivia allowed a small smile, modifying her typical response patterns for the social context. "I'm implementing varied experience protocols," she said, then catching herself translated to civilian terminology. "I'm trying new things." Kyle laughed. "I speak fluent." "Olivia," now he declared, "it's like learning a new language where everything is tactical. Operations and mission parameters." She recognized the teasing as friendly rather than hostile. Another distinction she was gradually mastering in civilian contexts. The assessment confirmed when Kyle added seriously, "Though it's cool you're here. Expanding your high school experience portfolio." He raised his phone slightly. "Mind if I get a pic for the blog? Social documentation only. I promise." Olivia weighed security concerns against integration objectives, concluding that normal social visibility served her cover better than conspicuous avoidance acceptable. She agreed, positioning herself at an angle that minimized facial recognition efficiency while appearing natural. Kyle snapped several photos, showing her the results for approval. "These work?" he asked, with surprising sensitivity to her evident privacy concerns. Olivia nodded, selecting one that showed her looking relaxed but not directly at the camera. "This one is suitable." She confirmed. Kyle's expression showed amusement at her phrasing, but he nodded. "Most people just say they like how they look," he observed, "but you evaluate photos like intelligence assets, don't you?" The question was too perceptive, indicating Kyle's continued interest in her background despite previous warnings. Situational adaptation required. Olivia decided, "I'm working on my normal teenager terminology," she replied with deliberate self-deprecation. The strategic humor achieved its objective. Kyle laughed, relaxing his investigative posture well. "You're getting better at blending in," he assured her. 6 weeks ago, you would have said the photo maintains adequate operational security or something. As the evening progressed, Olivia found herself drawn into various social interactions, each requiring different adaptive protocols. Vicky engaged her in debate team strategy with several other members, their analytical minds appreciating Olivia's tactical approach to argumentation. A group of curious underclassmen asked carefully worded questions about her confrontation with Heather in the library, which she deflected with practiced ease. Even Mackenzie eventually approached, maintaining her habitual physical distance, but extending a social olive branch in the form of questions about training. Techniques that might improve her track performance. Olivia provided modified versions of sentinel conditioning exercises appropriate for civilian athletes, careful to frame them as standard military fitness protocols rather than specialized operator. Training throughout these interactions, she maintained environmental awareness, tracking movements, noticing patterns, establishing baseline behaviors against which anomalies could be measured. This hyper-awareness allowed her to notice Jessica Morales from self-defense class, looking increasingly uncomfortable as two senior boys blocked her path to the door, the girl's body language signaling distress, though the situation appeared outwardly casual to civilian observers. "Excuse me," Olivia said. To Heather, implementing the protection protocol from Ramirez's revised framework, "I need to address a situation." Heather followed her gaze, recognizing the developing scenario with surprising perceptiveness. "Those guys are being creeps," she confirmed. "They've been told off for boundary issues before, want backup." Olivia assessed the tactical situation. Two opponents, minimal threat level, no weapons, visible crowd complications, moderate intervention. "Justified," she nodded. "Civilian. Support increases intervention effectiveness," she acknowledged, moving through the crowd with purposeful efficiency. Heather following close behind. "Hey, Jessica," Olivia called, approaching the group with calculated casualness. "We've been looking for you." The debate meeting got moved to Monday instead. The fabricated conversation created pretext for extraction. The senior boys turned with obvious annoyance at the interruption. "We're talking here," one of them said. Brandon Mitchell, Olivia's memory. Supplied basketball reserve, aggressive tendencies, 3 disciplinary incidents for fighting last semester. Jessica's relief at the interruption was evident in her posture. "We're done talking," she said, attempting to step around Brandon, who shifted. To maintain his blocking position. "I don't think we are, yet," he insisted, his tone carrying underlying aggression that triggered Olivia's threat assessment protocols. "Brandon," Olivia said, her voice shifting subtly into the command tone Sentinel had perfected for civilian compliance. "Jessica is leaving now. You're going to step aside." Brandon's focus shifted to Olivia, recognition dawning in his expression. "You're that girl," he said, from the library videos. Olivia maintained eye contact steady, a calm projecting absolute certainty. "Yes, and right now I'm asking you to let Jessica pass." The standoff lasted precisely 3 seconds before Brandon's companion tugged his arm. "Dude, not worth it," he muttered loud enough for Olivia to hear. "That chick dropped Heather Blackwood without breaking a sweat." Remember, the calculation was visible on Brandon's face, pride warring with self-preservation, before he finally stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. Whatever he said, she wasn't interested anyway. Jessica moved quickly to Olivia's side, Heather completing the protective formation as they guided her away from the situation. "Thanks," Jessica said, once they reached the relative safety of the deck that was getting uncomfortable. "They've been following me around all night." Olivia nodded, monitoring behavior patterns indicating potential escalation. She confirmed her assessment, automatic and clinical. "You established verbal boundaries, which they ignored, qualifying intervention as appropriate." Jessica looked at her with newfound appreciation. "You make it sound so logical," she said with a small laugh. Heather rolled her eyes. "That's Olivia's superpower," she explained, turning everything into tactical operations, even rescuing someone from creepy guys. The moment was interrupted by commotion. From inside the house, raised voices followed by the distinctive sound of breaking glass. Olivia's body tensed, automatically shifting to alert status. Threat assessment activated before she could consciously override. The response It's just, Tyler's idiot brother Heather explained. Noticing Olivia's reaction, he always shows up drunk and starts something. The information allowed Olivia to recategorize the situation from potential threat to civilian disturbance. Still, the raised voices and evident confrontation triggered ingrained response patterns that were difficult to suppress. "I should check the situation," she said. Moving toward the door, Heather caught her arm. "Wait," she cautioned. "It's not your problem. Tyler's parents will handle it. They're upstairs." Olivia hesitated, torn between training that demanded situation control and integration objectives that required accepting civilian authority structures. "You can't solve every conflict," she reminded herself, implementing Ramirez's guidance on selective engagement. "This isn't a sentinel operation." The momentary internal struggle must have been visible because Heather studied her with newfound understanding. "You really can't help it, can you?" she said quietly. "The whole guardian protector thing, it's not just training, it's who you are now." Olivia considered this assessment, finding unexpected accuracy in it. Sentinel had selected participants with specific psychological profiles, then enhanced natural tendencies through specialized conditioning until response patterns became inseparable from identity. Lieutenant Ramirez had acknowledged this during their consultation. Integration isn't about erasing who you are. It's about controlling when and how you reveal it. "Perhaps I'm still calibrating civilian response thresholds," Olivia admitted, allowing rare vulnerability to show. Heather squeezed her arm gently. "Well, as the resident civilian expert," she said with a smile, "sometimes the correct response is to let other people handle their own chaos. That's part of normal teenage life too, learning when not to intervene." The party continued past midnight. Olivia, observing with fascination the increasingly complex social dynamics as inhibitions lowered interpersonal boundaries, shifted alliances formed and dissolved, all without strategic objectives or tactical purpose, pure unstructured human interaction governed by emotional impulses rather than operational parameters. When Heather finally suggested leaving, Olivia had compiled extensive mental notes on civilian adolescent behavior patterns that would have impressed even Lieutenant Ramirez with their detail and insight. The drive home in Heather's car provided opportunity for analysis, so she asked as they pulled away from the house, "What's your official tactical assessment of your first real high school party?" Olivia considered her response, carefully measuring honesty against operational security, chaotic, unpredictable. "Inefficient," she concluded, then added after a moment's reflection, "and unexpectedly informative." Heather laughed. "That might be the most positive review Tyler's parties have ever gotten," she said, steering through the quiet residential streets. "Inefficient, but informative." High praise from Olivia Winters. The following Monday brought unexpected developments at school. Olivia arrived to find Jessica Morales waiting by her locker, surrounded by 3 other girls Olivia recognized from various classes. "Hey," Jessica greeted with unusual animation. "We wanted to thank you for Saturday night." The other girls nodded with varying degrees of enthusiasm. "We've all had problems with Brandon and his friends." One explained, a quiet sophomore with glasses. "They don't take no for an answer," another added. "But after what happened with you, they've been keeping their distance." Jessica's expression turned serious. "We were wondering," she began, then hesitated, exchanging glances with the others, "if you might teach us some of those self-defense moves you showed in gym class. Just the basics." The strategic request caught Olivia momentarily off guard, requiring rapid assessment of security implications against potential benefits, tactical training for civilian self-protection, minimal risk, supervised instruction, controlled environment, limited techniques, acceptable parameters. "I could show you some basics," Olivia agreed, careful to maintain cover as an ordinary student with standard knowledge, not specialized. "And training," Jessica's face lit up with relief. Really, that would be amazing. When could we start? Olivia considered scheduling options, calculating time management against established training regimens and academic requirements perhaps twice weekly. After school, she suggested the gymnasium has mats available until 4. The arrangement satisfies physical requirements. The decision made the girls exchange contact information with Olivia, establishing the impromptu training group with surprising efficiency. By lunch period, news of the arrangement had spread, bringing 3 additional requests from students seeking similar instruction, creating unexpected operational complexity. Heather observed the developing situation with amusement. "You accidentally started a self-defense club," she noted as Olivia updated her growing list of potential students. "People trust you. They feel safer knowing you'll teach them to protect themselves." Olivia considered this assessment, finding it aligned with Sentinel's secondary objectives: skill transfer for force multiplication, increasing security capacities within designated operational zones. Although the context had shifted dramatically from military application to high school social dynamics, the principles remained consistent that evening. She called Elliot Chen from the Sentinel support group, seeking guidance on selecting appropriate civilian techniques for instruction, maintaining operational security while providing effective training. He answered on the first ring voice, automatically dropping to operational levels. "Elliot, secure. We're not on mission comms," Olivia reminded him, amused, despite herself at how quickly they both reverted to Sentinel protocols when connecting with each other. "Right?" Elliot's voice normalized those still cautious civilian parameters. "How are you?" Olivia explained the developing situation at Pinecrest, the self-defense instruction request, the security implications, the fine line between appropriate civilian techniques and classified Sentinel methodologies. Elliot listened with the focused attention they'd all been trained to provide when operational planning was underway. "Stick to commercial martial arts fundamentals," he advised, after careful consideration. "Nothing proprietary about basic joint locks, takedowns, escape techniques, standard curricula available in any civilian dojo. I've been running something similar here." He admitted, teaching a small group appropriate physical response mechanisms. Their conversation shifted to broader integration challenges, comparing adaptive strategies from Ramirez's framework implemented across different civilian environments. Elliot's RAI strategic planning for program sustainability occupied significant operational bandwidth as Olivia developed contingency protocols for her eventual graduation and transition to college-level education. "This isn't just about current implementation," she explained during strategy session with Coach Diaz. "Guardian Circle requires institutional framework for continued operation beyond individual leadership." Coach Diaz nodded with professional approval. "Your operational planning extends beyond tactical timelines," she observed, demonstrating strategic vision rather than immediate objective focus. Olivia had identified 3 advanced participants besides Jessica with potential for leadership development, implementing careful assessment protocols to evaluate their capabilities without compromising security parameters. These selected individuals receiving enhanced training while remaining unaware of its specialized origins. Their development tracked through metrics adapted from Sentinel, evaluation frameworks modified for civilian application, systematic preparation for operational continuity beyond her direct involvement. October brought unexpected operational challenge when local news outlet requested comprehensive feature story on Guardian Circle, including detailed background on its founding and methodologies. The increased public visibility creating potential security concerns that required careful management. Olivia and Coach Diaz developed coordinated response strategy, balancing legitimate public interest against operational security. The journalists' initial questions, probing areas that approached classified parameters. "Where did you learn these specific techniques?" the reporter asked during preliminary interview. "Your methods seem unusually effective for someone without formal military or law enforcement training," Olivia implemented prepared deflection protocols. "My father served in military special operations," she acknowledged with calculated openness, who believed in preparing family members for potential threats. "Basic awareness and response techniques were part of our household routine." The partial disclosure, satisfying journalistic curiosity, while redirecting attention from institutional connections. The resulting article, focusing on Guardian Circle's community impact, rather than tactical specifics, emphasizing empowerment philosophy rather than technical methodology, security maintained through strategic information management while enhancing program's civilian credibility. Halloween weekend created unexpected application opportunity when Guardian Circle Advanced Division provided security consultation for community festival implementation of civilian surveillance protocols and preventative positioning, resulting in identification and interdiction of potential threat situations before escalation. "Your training demonstrates practical application," Coach Diaz noted during post-event assessment. "Civilian protection implemented through preventative methodology rather than reactive response." Precisely, the balanced specialized training should achieve in civilian context. Olivia acknowledged operational objectives achieved through community framework rather than institutional implementation. The practical success validating Guardian Circle's methodological approach, while providing valuable field experience for advanced participants under controlled conditions. Jessica particularly demonstrated enhanced situational awareness, identifying behavioral indicators that suggested potential confrontation before physical manifestation. Her capabilities approaching specialized operative parameters, though developed through civilian methodology rather than institutional conditioning. Thanksgiving break brought opportunity for secure gathering of former Sentinel participants, coordinated through Lieutenant Ramirez's unofficial channels. 7 former operatives meeting at neutral location to exchange integration experiences and methodological developments. The unprecedented assembly creating valuable opportunity for comparative assessment across different civilian implementations. Elliot Chen had established technology-focused application of specialized training. Jessica Wilson developed educational implementation framework, others demonstrating varying degrees of successful civilian adaptation while maintaining operational capabilities. Olivia observed these diverse approaches with professional interest, recognizing how individual psychological profiles and civilian environments had shaped different integration pathways. Despite identical initial training, the gathering providing both tactical insights and personal connection with others who understood the unique challenges of post-Sentinel civilian navigation. No external monitoring devices, Elliot confirmed after conducting electronic sweep, allowing rare opportunity for unguarded discussion among former participants. They shared integration challenges, psychological adjustment techniques, and civilian cover maintenance strategies, each contributing unique perspectives from their individual experiences, creating comprehensive knowledge base beyond official transition protocols. What became increasingly evident through this exchange was Olivia's unique integration success, her balanced implementation of operational capabilities within legitimate civilian framework, representing optimal adaptation compared to other approaches. Several former participants demonstrating excessive compartmentalization between operational identity and civilian cover. Others struggling with psychological adjustment to civilian parameters. Lieutenant Ramirez observed these differences with analytical attention. Your Guardian Circle methodology demonstrates superior integration framework, she noted during private consultation, establishing sustainable civilian operation while maintaining operational capabilities without institutional support. The assessment carrying significant weight, given Ramirez's extensive experience with specialized asset management across multiple programs throughout decades of service. Your approach could inform future program development, she suggested, regarding post-operational transition. In protocols, the implications extending beyond Sentinel to broader applications for specialized operatives, returning to civilian parameters. December brought mid-year academic evaluations and Guardian Circle performance assessments, Olivia implementing comprehensive review protocols adapted from Sentinel methodology to civilian educational context, measuring participant progress against established benchmarks while identifying areas for curriculum refinement, the data demonstrating exceptional development across all program divisions, particularly in advanced participants selected for potential leadership roles. Jessica's performance metrics approaching specialized operative parameters, though developed through civilian training rather than institutional conditioning, she demonstrates natural aptitude. Coach Diaz observed during evaluation review, compatible psychological profile, enhanced situational awareness, tactical decision-making capabilities. Olivia acknowledged these observations. While maintaining appropriate security boundaries regarding their significance, Jessica remained unaware of these specialized assessments, her enthusiasm stemming from personal empowerment rather than operational potential. The parallel assessment tracks maintaining necessary compartmentalization while allowing targeted development of her capabilities. College application process created additional operational considerations as Olivia balanced academic objectives against security parameters. Selecting institutions that offered both educational opportunities and potential operational continuity, Coach Diaz provided guidance regarding programs with connections to intelligence community or law enforcement, where specialized capabilities might find legitimate application without compromising security. Several institutions offer potential continuation pathways. She noted civilian education with parallel operational development maintained through appropriate cover mechanisms. Olivia considered these options with strategic assessment developing multi-year plan that balanced immediate educational objectives with long-term operational potential while maintaining necessary separation between classified background and civilian. The planning extending beyond tactical timelines to comprehensive life strategy, integrating specialized training within legitimate professional development. Winter break provided opportunity for operational assessment with Lieutenant Ramirez. Comprehensive review of Guardian Circle development and personal integration metrics. Your civilian adaptation demonstrates optimal parameters, she confirmed after analyzing extensive documentation, program implementation, security protocols, psychological adjustment, and community engagement, all exceeding projected metrics. While maintaining operational readiness, Olivia recognized this professional validation while understanding her development extended beyond quantifiable parameters into areas Sentinel had never anticipated: genuine emotional connection, authentic community engagement, personal relationships developing beyond tactical necessity. What began as integration protocol has evolved beyond parameters, she acknowledged, discovering new applications for specialized training within civilian context. Ramirez studied her with professional assessment. That's the most significant finding. She agreed, specialized capabilities enhanced rather than compromised by civilian integration. Psychological compartmentalization replaced by authentic synthesis, creating operational advantages beyond original programming.